It's me, the trauma-informed SLP, or the Kim version. I'm the Kim trauma-informed SLP. There are more than just me out there. It's Pride, baby! Happy Pride, everybody! Woo! And also, rights for everybody this Pride. That's right. Equal rights, equity, social justice, all that stuff for everybody, okay? Let's do that for everybody. In honor of Pride Month, I want to do a video talking about the identities that I fit within that LGBTQIA+ spectrum. Long acronym, isn't it? It is really long. It's lesbian, gay, bisexual, queer, intersex, asexual, aromantics, polyamorous, polysexual, pansexual, etc., etc., etc. So like really it could just be like a really long acronym. Oh my gosh. So why all the letters? Pride is really about a celebration of anybody who has different experiences with sexuality, gender, and romanticism compared to the societal norms, especially in the United States. Because there's a lot of variance in people's experiences, they come up with different ways of describing themselves. And so there's a lot of letters and a lot of labels because effectively it's about finding people who have common experiences to you and being able to find that feeling of normalization around those people and validation for who you are so you don't feel ashamed and feeling kind of included in some sort of community, a safe space for yourself. So when it comes to me, I identify with 3 of those letters. The first one standing for B, bisexual. I use this as an umbrella term, and this is more because of my own neurodivergent sensibilities, but the pansexual flag's colors are just like a little too bright for me. I don't know what it is, but I'm like, So if I'm gonna represent colors, I'm gonna represent the bisexual flag. So I have had attraction for people of female presentation and male presentation throughout my life. Although crushes in general are more rare for me because the other thing I identify with is asexual. More specifically, demisexual, sometimes called gray ace, where people who only feel sexual attraction to a person's personality or their character and not their physical appearance at all. Basically, I've never had that experience of somebody being like, oh my gosh, that barista is just so hot. I'm so distracted by how hot they are. That doesn't happen to me. I've tried to play along and smile and nodded when it happens because it seems to happen to a lot of people, but it just never really happened to me. Honestly, sexual attraction in general is a rare thing for me to feel. The other thing I identify with is agender, and I didn't even know this was a thing. I guess I should have known something about it, but I found out about it like, I guess about a year ago really, where I read about it and was like, that totally fits me. Which means I have no internal sense of gender. I know I look very female and I'm socialized female, so I definitely understand a lot of those issues of being socialized female, but I'm not gender fluid. I don't feel like I have a gender that fits something other than the male-female binary. I just feel kind of meh about gender for myself. I am playing around with using a they pronoun a bit, but honestly, I do feel more like an it. That I feel like it would actually fit me a lot better. Basically, despite what my body looks like, I don't feel like a woman. I don't tend to act like a woman toward other people that much, or really like a man, honestly. I just act like a me and it in a very non-gendered human kind of way. Okay, if you're still hanging in there with me. Now I wanted to talk a little bit about my own journey, just in case hearing about my journey helps anybody else out there. So, about the bisexual identity. When I was growing up, bisexual representation was essentially non-existent. Most of the times, it was like, this person is now a lesbian, or they are now gay. Think like Willow on Buffy, you know? She had this long-term relationship with a guy, and then when she got in a relationship with Tara, with the girl, it was like, now she's a lesbian. And in my best bisexual brain, I was like, why? Why is it suddenly a lesbian? Why not like just bisexual? I was very confused by all of that stuff. The other issue I had with growing up is that bisexuality, the stereotype around it, which I know I even said this. I had a friend who identified as bisexual, and I remember even saying this to her at the time. But the stereotype were that bisexuals were more into sex, essentially, than people, and so they just essentially weren't picky about their sexual partners. And as a demisexual, that definitely doesn't fit me. I think it wasn't until I was in my 30s when I actually heard the term demisexual or asexual as an actual thing. And in my experience, demisexuality essentially meant I was cursed to have crushes on friends for my whole life because I have to get to know somebody and then I develop feelings for them. But because of my ADHD, I was very blunt, I was very upfront, and I was extremely oblivious to passive request and implicit language and stuff like that. So I had a lot of trouble like being really good friends with girls growing up. I just clicked better with guy friends usually because they didn't mind my more blunt and upfront way of talking, and also guys are not socialized to be really passive. So I was definitely cursed to have crushes on guys most of the time. But I did have a couple of extremely big crushes on girls, but I didn't understand them as crushes at the time because since I never really had good girlfriends, everybody was like, oh, having a girlfriend as a girl is like the best thing ever. It's like, wow, magic and wonderfulness. And so I just kind of thought the crushes were related to that. I thought like, oh, I guess this is like that girl friendship magic that everybody's talking about and not like, you know, actual crushes. So basically, if you combine the bisexual experiences I've had with the asexual experiences I've had, it created a lot of confusion growing up because there was very little representation, not a whole lot of information on the internet at the time because the internet was still burgeoning and young, at least when I was in middle school. Yeah, it's not too much of a surprise that I ended up married to a guy just based off of who I ended up being friends with more often when you combine my neurodivergency within that. So yes, I could pass as straight, but that doesn't mean I am straight. I honestly think it's incredibly unfair that it even matters. Interesting thing about bisexuals, we really don't get why it matters who people like, whether guys like guys or girls like girls or whatever, because we're like, crushes are crushes, you know, feelings are feelings. Like, we don't really care at all. So my newest label, agender. It's a new label, but it's not actually really that new of an identity. Let me tell you a short story about some of my agenderism. I remember this time, sometime around first grade. I had really long hair for a long time, but I climbed trees, I was very active, it would get tangled all the time, and I have a pretty sensitive scalp. So my mom got sick of like detangling my hair, right? This is the early 80s. So my mom took me to the hairdresser and had them give me a short haircut, which in the early 80s often ended up being that bowl cut that you think of like the D&D group in first season of Stranger Things, the like little boy group there. Boy group, that sounds like a band. That was pretty much what my hair looked like. And my best friend was a guy. I did a lot of guy things. I always had a combo of guy toys and girl toys. Like I had He-Man and I had Barbies, you know what I mean? And I would dress for comfort and mobility most of the time, but I also enjoyed dressing up in sparkles and frills and stuff because my ADHD brain loves sparkles. I could just stare at sparkles all day. When I went home with my new bowl haircut and looked at myself in my mirror in my bedroom, I remember thinking I look like a boy. And then my little like 5 to 6 year old brain went, oh, I guess I'm a boy now. Mom gave me a boy haircut. I must be a boy. Maybe the doctor just called her and said, hey, we made a mistake and she's not a girl. It's actually a boy. My reaction to this was, okay. I had no feelings. I didn't change anything. I didn't even ask about it. My mom didn't even know I had that thought process until way later when I mentioned it more like as a young adult. She was like, oh, I didn't know you felt that way. I just thought I was a boy and didn't care. It was like, makes no impact on me. I'm just gonna go on about living my life because agender. So that's basically agender, is feeling like you could body swap me tomorrow and I would not care. It would not affect who I am. I would be like, sure. I remember talking about myself as an it, and I remember talking about myself as an asexual being in a shameful way, because in my 20s, I thought there must be something very wrong with me, with the fact that I didn't feel sexual attraction that often, and with the fact that I didn't feel feminine or male. People have called me manly. People have called me not feminine enough. I got plenty of advice on how to be more feminine growing up. I felt something was wrong with me, and I felt really ashamed. It was just another aspect of how broken and wrong I was. So now when I call myself asexual, when I call myself agender, when I call myself bisexual, this is all very affirming, quite frankly. It's validating. When I hear about experiences of other people who fit these labels, when I read about their experiences, when I see that I fit somewhere, I feel less shame and I feel less broken and I feel more like just a human who happens to have different experiences from other people. And yes, because I do pass as straight and because I'm not married to a female presenting person, I don't experience a lot of the systemic oppression that queer groups experience. If I were married to any other gender presentation, I would be under a lot more scrutiny and be experiencing a lot more systemic oppression than I am. And I think that's ridiculous. Ridiculous, unfair, unjust, just, ugh. But I have experienced the internalized sense of shame. And that's something that I think pretty much every queer identifies with, is some feeling growing up that you're somehow broken, which Hopefully newer generations aren't getting quite as heavily, but unfortunately sometimes they are, right? Now, some of you very savvy folks out there might have realized that I talked about representing the B and 2 forms of the A letter, but I said I identify with 3 letters. So where's the 3rd letter? Well, that's brought to you by the letter Q. That's because I identify as queer as well. While the term queer has been and is still probably used by some people as a slur outside of the community, it is an umbrella term for all variants on sexuality, romanticism, and gender outside of the societal cis heterosexual expectations, essentially. And many people in the community reclaimed this term for ourselves, okay? So when somebody says they're queer, they can fit 1 letter or multiple letters. It doesn't matter. So you could kind of say that pride itself is brought to you by the letter Q. So I like to self-identify as queer because it's just an easier way of explaining not straight, not cis. Just an easier way of explaining that. So that's a little bit of me and a little bit of my own queer identities. This particular Pride Month, whether you're an ally or queer yourself, I just want to say happy Pride to all of you. Pride is both a celebration and also a defiant declaration that different doesn't mean broken or less than or unhuman. And this to me is inherently trauma-informed. So, cheers to my queers out there everywhere and happy Pride.